pleasure this morning to introduce Warwick Pudney, who's about to address us. Warwick will be well known to many of you, if not all of you. Warwick's been involved in education. He's the founder CEO of Man Alive here in West Auckland. He's currently lecturer in science, drama studies at AUT, and his working life as a man has been involved with the position of men in our culture. He's been very involved with working in the area of men's violence, and I really appreciate the way that he has always not just asked the questions about what is it and what can we do about it, but he's also asked questions about why is it happening and what's the context in which this arises. Warwick also likes to take himself off to the mountains and the tracks and the coastlines of New Zealand. Take a little time just to be with the land and the country. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome him to speak to us this morning. I welcome him to speak to us this morning.
Thank you. I want to talk with you today around men and violence. It's a fairly sticky topic because there's been a lot of analysis around it, and I think men carry quite a bit of guilt about it. Most of that is appropriate. Violence is not good. However, if I ask you what sort of violence do you think is most prevalent, probably you would say, unfortunately, it's male to female violence. And I want to have a look at this and suggest that, in fact, there may be other forms of violence that are more prevalent. Men are both perpetrators and victims of violence, as are women and children. This is a human problem, and it's humans with a full range of emotions, from hurt, grief and fear to anger. If we combine this with belief systems and choice, we have the wonderful vulnerability of the human condition and also the power to do something about it and be responsible for it. So violence in relation to gender has a number of possibilities. We've got male-to-male violence, male-to-female violence, female-to-male violence, and female-to-female violence. I'm suggesting to you today that the prevalence of violence in our community is as it's laid out on this slide, that in fact the most prevalent form of violence in our community is male-to-male violence. And yet, we would probably not have thought about that. We would probably have thought that it was male-to-female violence. Male-to-male violence is the most common violence in our community, followed by male-to-female. Much of the male-to-female violence, of course, happens in our homes. Female-to-male violence is also more common in our homes than we would want to acknowledge. And lastly, there's female-to-female violence. I also suggest that measurement of rates of violence is confounded by biased measuring tools and a reluctance to report violent incidents. There are more deaths by assaults of men. In these figures, the number is almost double. You'll see down the bottom of the slide figures of deaths by assault to males, and they're 32 as opposed to 18. It's almost double. There were more cases in hospitals of assaults to men. These figures, next slide there, Brad, and this is only part of the scale. The assaults on the second to bottom row there, female assaults, female cases of assault in hospital, 1,048, and male cases of assault in hospital, 3,302. So there are three times the number of women. The rate of murders of men has a consistency also of around 3 times that of women. The data suggests that male-to-male violence is the most prevalent type of violence, at a rate of double to treble. The data also will discuss. The data is subject to the reporting, but hospitalisation tends to be due to injuries that go beyond the scope of denial. So there's probably some accuracy in that. As I implied earlier, a major problem around cases of assault on males is that it's not reported. Male-to-male violence. We have major problems with the validity of reports of violence to males by either males or female perpetrators. And the key problems are that men do not consider many incidents to be violent. And one of the things that women did when they were looking at violence in the home is what they had to do is build an increased awareness of what actually was a violent incident, because many people were accepting violence that was in fact violence, and they had not thought that so. Men have exactly the same, they're in the same position, and that they will often not report a thing as violent or consider it as violent until it's maybe suggested to them that that's what it is. Men as well don't report violence if they do consider it to be violence. And men will try to solve the problem by themselves rather than report it. Men also are not believed when they report violence. And as well, violence to men is minimised when it is reported. There's a lack of investigation and research on men as victims, and I hope Stuart, after me, alludes to some of this. Male-to-male violence is condoned by both males and females. The reason why is, I suggest, that we, as does any society, actively train our males to be prepared to fight to protect women, family, children, community and nation. To have no men prepared to do this leaves the nation exposed, anxious and vulnerable. It's immensely reassuring when 15 of the fittest and toughest men go out onto the rugby field with a local or national jersey on and do battle for 80 minutes over territory and win. It's reassuring to know that people are prepared to die in the course of your protection. I speculate that the loss of the World Cup, not the last one, but the one before, where the All Blacks were taken out by the French, in fact, had a profound effect on the election that was held the week after. And we do know that police activity increases after an All Black loss. The protector role both elevates and devours men. When my son was 17, I found a container of bulk muscle food in the pantry. He was doing a course of weights at the gym to build his body. It didn't transfer into labour in the garden, but it certainly attracted the young women. I suggest that women are collusive in the desire to have men strong, brave and able to fight, and in fact may penalise them if they fail at this task. Training commences at birth with the unconscious holding of male babies for shorter amounts of time, for less eye contact, less verbal communication, rougher handling and holding further away from the caregiver's body. A boy who's been bullied is likely to be assisted or told to stick up for himself. A girl is likely to elicit parent intervention. We hit our boys more. Boys are more likely to be physically abused, and then we're likely to punish or incarcerate them for longer. Protection has always been role-bound. Males on average have 30% more muscle tissue. We train men to be able to protect children, women and society. It's socially functional to protect the continuance of a society or a culture. Men are currently dying doing so in various parts of the world at the moment. There is, however, a cost. In order to compete for resources to protect others, it is necessary to objectify others before being able to hurt or disable them. In order to do this, there's an emotional postponement of internal process and to some extent an emotional shutdown. To young men, the call is to toughen up. Tough implies being able to hold ground and be prepared to strike or retaliate to another. There are costs if this does not take place. Such costs may be loss of autonomy to another male, loss of autonomy to a woman, loss of desirability to women as partners, loss of resources or loved ones, and maybe loss of respect of others, gay men. Know some of this dilemma. However, there are costs for doing it also. Men suffer more injury on behalf of women. Men suffer more injury at the hands of each other. Men die earlier. Men repress vulnerable emotions. Men express anger easier or instead of other emotions. Men process emotional states at a slower rate. Men may be less emotionally literate. I'm not saying that they are not able to be more literate, but the training may make them so. Men may be more open to emotional manipulation. Men may not build and maintain emotional relationships with each other so easily. And men may be, and are in our culture, more isolated from each other. Thus we have a dilemma of costs. Internationally, men die earlier due to protective role dangers and arguably the unhealthy repression of vulnerable emotions. Their families may suffer greater poverty and dysfunction because of that. Not only will they suffer, but the generations following will bear consequence. The grandfather, who I never saw, who died as a result of lung damage after experiencing mustard gas in the trenches of World War I, was unable to pass on an imprint of grandparenting to me. 91 years later, I'm aware that I will have to invent this relationship consciously from less personal models. Protection of family is indelibly strong. I recall a man who, on his graduation from an anger management program, when asked as a test what he would do if someone in the pub took his mother's name in vain, responded immediately that he would, without hesitation, take him outside and hit him. That's how indelible that protection thing is, particularly of women. We receive as boy children strong injunctions not to hit girls, and perhaps equally strong injunctions to stick up for ourselves and not let ourselves get pushed around by other boys. These are two very different messages. And thus this permission giving to be violent to other males is reflected in male injury statistics. Internationally, there are other models that mix vulnerability with strength as males. And considerable change has taken place. The state's taking greater involvement in protection of women and children. Women are taking on a wider social role of protector too. The world, however, is becoming a more dangerous place. The costs to men are enormous for their aggression towards one another. This is driven by training for protection by both men and women. It creates violence that is unnecessary between men. And the way forward is for men to cease that violence to each other. Most intergender violence takes place within the family home. So family violence is only part of the total violence of our community. So when we're regarding male to female violence, feminist research on male to female violence has given a strong political base for feminists to comment from. There is consistency in feminist research for about 90% of violence being perpetrated by male partners. However, non-feminist research indicates that it may be closer to equal, 50-50. The Otago longitudinal study makes such a suggestion. I suggest that research is inconclusive due to, one, political motivation, consciously or unconsciously affecting results of research. The Hate Project in Hamilton, which found 94% of violence to be male, had researchers who were from within the project but not independent. And two, from incomplete or non-random samples, the Dunedin study interviewed from a cohort of 21-year-olds. Scales used for measuring violence may be based on male to female violence. The tools for measuring violence are also developed from a woman's experienced violence. Men and women have different expressions of violence. There can be no doubt that men are more physical and stronger, So physical and sexual violation is more overt. Women's expression of power and control is likely to be more relational, emotional, and verbal. Bias in the measurement tools may lead to skewed results. It's likely that male violence to women occurs more frequently, and that the percentage varies but lies somewhere between 50 to 90%. However, it should be clear that even 1% from either gender is intolerable and has destructive effects on both the perpetrator and the victim. Female to male violence. The following quote is from a case that happened in West Auckland within the last 2 years. It shows examples of male reluctance to report, reluctance by the police to hear, lack of police support of the order, and possibly reluctance by the perpetrator to believe that anything could happen. And I quote, "I thought many times before I finally went for a protection order from my ex-wife. I did not want to. I had to put up with stalking, vandalism, sabotage to my business work, assault and incessant abusive phone calls. When I did get it, the order initially made no difference. I complained to the police, as I was told to, but they did nothing. I could sense that they thought I was pathetic or weak or even joking. After about 5 complaints to the police, including some serious incidents, something happened, but only because the victim support coordinator challenged the police and I threatened to lay a police complaint. Then they did something. It wasn't till after about 3 court appearances and a remand in the women's prison that she sort of stopped." So I'll go back to this quote, I think, shows examples of male reluctance to report, reluctance by the police to hear, and the lack of police support of the order, and possibly reluctance by the perpetrator to believe that anything could happen. And I think that's a key influence on whether a person reports violence. While men have more physical strength, the major influence on most of the above problem is the condoning of violence to males on the basis that they're tough enough to look after themselves. The above example runs counter to the male protector role. Condoning is the major reason that we know so little of male-to-male violence or female-to-male violence and are even resistant to noticing it. While men have more physical strength, women have the power of emotional and relational training, and this may be used to isolate men in families or manage and control the father male's relationship with others, emotionally manipulate or relationally manipulate, use the mother transference to prevent male partner autonomy, manipulate the children's relationship with the father. Additionally, the power of both men and women wanting to rescue females from men makes the male the least credible in any conflict, hence police reluctance to arrest. Women have been encouraged through years of awareness building to not tolerate any form of violence and to report or define boundaries and consequences immediately it begins. Great. Men have not done this. They need to firstly have awareness that it's happening and then also be able to report it. While the reporting of male-to-male violence is seen as somewhat weak and a sign of an inadequate male, the reporting of violence by a woman to a man is even more embarrassing. Female violence is not the subject of this paper, but we need to acknowledge that it exists. So are we really committed to non-violence or just stopping some violence? We must ask whether just asking men and women to stop violence to their partners is enough. If we care, then we must stop all violence. Violence to men also. Can we assist men to non-violence that excludes themselves? Isn't there an inconsistency in a response that must be confusing to any member of a therapy group? That is, don't be violent to women, and we won't talk about your violence to other men. There's an inconsistency. If you're changing a behaviour, there needs to be a solid consistency about that behaviour. A more consistent approach would be good for all sorts of violence. So, what are the results of violence to us as men? Well, there's a reduction in wairua, or life force. Please, Bruce alluded to spirituality around health. So they'll reduce of spirit, self-esteem, love for both perpetrator and victim. There's a huge cost to public services such as prisons, hospitals, ACC, police, employers, productivity, GMP, courts, and the benefit system. If family violence costs up to $5 billion each year, Women's Refuge figures, then the total cost of all violence, that's male-to-male violence, which we saw before from statistics is probably double that of male-to-female violence, then the savings would be enormous. So what's the cause of violence to and by men? Well, I suggest that the cause of violence to and by men are the condoning and training of males to be violent for the well-being of family and society, the denial of a problem of male-to-male violence, the lack of a holistic approach to looking at all violence in men's lives, and the drawing of political attention to just violence instead of just drawing political attention to violence to women. Beliefs that men are entitled to power over others by force or demand. Beliefs that men are supposed to fight each other to win regard, so we can change belief systems. Poor cognition of relational matters that lead to feelings of powerlessness. Poor skills to handle a matter in any other way. A lack of empathy for men. Some of that, I think, is due to poor fathering, and I hope Rex links up with this later on, because I think it's a critical factor in male-to-male violence. If we grow up with a father for which we have a strong positive regard, who we feel nurtured by, then we learn in that relationship how to relate positively to other males. And I think, if anything, this is a key factor. And I cringe when I think that at least a quarter of our families have males in them who do not live with their dad. That shouldn't prevent dad being a good dad, but it's absolutely vital for boys to experience the love and nurture of dad so that they can have experience to share that with other males. I think this is a major factor in male-to-male violence. Another cause is a passivity that I see a lot in Kiwi men, as passivity that later explodes. And another is individually poor choices amongst often limited choices. And another is being abused and growing fearful as children. So what do we need? As male perpetrators, I would suggest debriefing after socially condoned conflict. And I'm thinking about army, police, fire. Those services still exist in a place where it's a wee bit dubious if you do go and ask for help. There's fear that it might go on your record, so there's a lot of denial taking place. And we know the effects of wars and peacekeeping on our soldiers. Support and training in emotional relational matters, birth, partnering, separation, to assist men to handle relational and emotional change. We need an approach of rehabilitation rather than punishment. We're building more prisons and incarcerating men for longer instead. Much better anger management, non-violence programs that acknowledge not just the individual choice to be violent, but the powerlessness of many men's lives, and giving attention to that powerlessness so that their choices will alter drastically. We need, as male victims, police changes and attitude to assisting men making complaints of violence from men or women. A clear understanding that and acceptance that women also have power that can be misused towards men. Support for men who are victims. Police do not do this. Social services do not specifically do this, nor are they good at providing such services. Services delivered by men would also reduce their dependency on women for help and increase the appropriateness of services delivered. Particularly, of course, acknowledge Alan Blackburn, who will be speaking later on about social services to men and his experience with Men Alive. Specialist services at the family court are needed. The point at which a man's relationship is breaking up is when he is most vulnerable to depression, isolation and suicide. A change to male attitudes, to ones of care and concern. I was talking to a person heading Australia Men's Line. They have 5 times the number of calls that they're able to manage. But they are resourced. New Zealand Men's Line could handle 5 times the calls. It does currently. That means with resources, we could probably deal with 25 times the number that we currently do, resources and publicity. More broadly, what do we need? Well, we need men to take responsibility for the relationships in themselves. Now, I suggest that currently responsibility or initiative is often left to the closest women or not taken at all, thus ending in denial. Men to take responsibility for each other is essential. Men coming together and talking generates an understanding of the same problems and provides a reassurance that one is not alone, but sharing a reality from which mutual support can arise. The recognition that fathers are the first source of learning on how to love and be loved in a trusting relationship by men. We need the development and promotion of training for fathering that promotes fatherhood and the involved nurture of children so that boys learn at an early age to build nurture and intimacy with men and understand relationships of distance, isolation, or competition and toughness. We need notions of self-care as well as the care and protection of others. We need the seeking of models that allow protectors to function alongside safe emotional expression. And we need more research into male-to-male violence and female-to-male violence. So the answer to violence to and by men may not be in punishment and blame, but in a boundary compassion and care by men rather than action by women. That is a whole change for society and a challenge to war and pathological individualism. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of us all, thank you very much. This is a subject that's you've devoted so many years of your life, and the richness and the depth of it there. And